We go. Never to be seen again. Right? It's going to be in the ether somewhere. We'll be looking for it.
Be watching it in the middle of Siberia.
So we actually are recording right now. So
Okay, it does say, I see the recording on the top there.
yes, I just wanted to, I
Okay.
just wanted to make sure that was up and running.
I'm going to call the meeting to order. If we could all stand for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
For which it
stands,
stands one nation,
nation, under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible, with
liberty
liberty and justice for all.
all.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Kennellan, if you would start the introduction.
I will do that, Mrs. Carmody. Thank you. Let me share. We have with us Mr. McCoy, Luke McCoy, who's one of the principals at Castle Booze. There is Luke. Hi, Luke, who has been working very closely with Mr. Risser, doing our athletic facilities study. And I am going to give Luke the ability to share his screen here, if it's going to let me. Goodness. Of course, I'm recording. Does that make a difference?
You need my help, Tim?
I do, Mrs. Carmody.
Ha, okay.
I do. Here we go. Let me find you, Luke. You are there. I'm clicking more. And Luke, I'm making you the host. So that means if you do see anybody pop up that needs to be admitted, you have to do that too. This is like a multi-dimensional job for you.
Oh, okay. All right. I get control of all of it here.
You are now in control, Mr. McCoy. Thank you.
All right. So let's share the presentation here. I will open it.
That's a cute picture.
You little guy.
Yes, my little terror.
Well, he's a cutie.
So, okay. So hopefully now this is working and everyone can see the cover slide.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
All right, excellent. So as was mentioned, my name is Luke McCoy. I'm a landscape architect with Castle Booze Associates. Our office is located right in New Britain, Connecticut, right down the road. In fact, most of my focus over the last 20 years is municipal K through 12 schools with a focus on athletic facilities. So that is why I'm here. And Steve Risser and I were fortunate enough to work together on a project at his former school there, actually a number of projects there as they went through a similar process there. But what I want to do tonight was just walk everyone through a summary, kind of high level of what we've been up to this summer with reviewing the overall facility here at Southington High School. So we started with looking at the overall complex, and just to familiarize everyone with for this evening and kind of for the overall report, we used the following field numbering system. This does correlate to the map that's used on campus for the fields, but very quickly, field number 1 located down here is your current varsity softball field. Field number 2 adjacent to it is most commonly known as the lacrosse or field hockey field. Next, directly adjacent to that is the tennis courts, which we've sometimes referred to as number 11 within the document. Moving towards the north, all the way on the left, is field 9. That is JV softball currently. Next to that is field 3, which is your stadium field track that's there. As we continue north, you have field number 8, which is the upper multi-sport field. It's used by various different sports, including lacrosse and some soccer. as we continue to the right, field number 5, just behind your home bleachers and press box, is your mostly known as your soccer field. Next to that is field 4, your varsity baseball. Continuing north all the way to the northwest is field number 7, commonly referred to as the football practice field, way in the back. Field number 10 here, which you'll see, it's not actually a field yet, but it is that area in the back that has over the years been started to be transitioned into a field. It's been filled from various other projects. Materials have been brought back there with the intent of making it a usable field. And then finally, adjacent to that is field number 6, which is JV baseball. And then the outfield is used for other sports. So that being said, our process. So just to kind of give you an overview of what we went through. It started with an existing conditions assessment of the facility. It was a combination of walking the facility numerous times, myself, my staff, with Steve, with coaches. Also included taking soil samples from the various grass fields. And then also just looking at different data, either things that were provided from coaching and others of issues or concerns that they have with it, and compiling all of that. Concurrent to doing that, we also conducted facility programming, where we talked to each of the coaches to understand how they utilize it. All of that was then put together to develop a series of recommendations that we broke down into short-term and long-term, which then overall mapped out a 10-year capital improvement plan, which we'll talk about tonight. So with that, I'll get right into overall kind of the assessment for each of the fields. Some of you may be familiar with these individual fields or all of them from either, playing on them, having, spectators, being a spectator at them. Others may not. So I want to make sure I just walk through them briefly for everyone. So with the assessment, it included the overall surface, so whether it was a court or a track or the field itself, looking for the condition of the grass, undulations, how the planarity was. We looked at code and safety concerns for each of the facilities. So that would include things like accessibility, if it were buildings or structures, meeting current code. And then also with each field, looking at the amenities and accessory uses. So that would be things like lights, was there storage, things of that nature with it. And then understanding the usage and maintenance procedures to make sure that they balanced each other, that your maintenance procedures met with what the usage was for each. And then, as I said, the facility programming. This was where we developed a series of questionnaires and questions for coaches, but then actually walked the facility. The nice part about this, even though we are in the pandemic and we know that the school and everything has challenges, is this is all outside work and in the summer. So we were fortunate enough to be able to continue to proceed with our work during the summer and be out there because it was outdoors. And then finally, as I mentioned, the recommendations. So when we've mentioned short term, it was looking at really the next 2 to 3 years and what could be potentially targeted for that time. Then the immediate, which would be more of kind of major renovations and improvements that could be done possibly as part of a larger bonding or borrowing package to do it all at once. And then the long term would be either remaining renovations and improvements or also continued kind of maintenance items out there. And that led to mapping out that total capital improvement plan. So starting with field number 1 and 9, these are just some images of the current conditions out there for those that may not have been out in the fields lately. This is the current varsity softball and the JV softball field. So a few things just generally that we saw. Accessibility for both fields was an issue. It's not currently accessible not only for athletes, but also for spectators. 2 dugouts, 2 bleachers, but also the bleachers themselves currently are not accessible. A lack of bullpens and proper batting cage. And then just the overall condition of the field is showing signs of its age. The fencing is continuing to be repaired, but it's nearing the end of its life. It's bent in many locations. In fact, last year, some of the umpires actually made some comments and did have to have some repairs done in order for the field to continue to be used. But again, these images just kind of give you some idea of the condition of the field out there. From that, and speaking with Steve and the coaching staff, we started to look at two different options potentially for softball. And one was looking at maintaining varsity in the location where it's at and renovating that to bring it up to standards and meet Title IX and things of that nature, and then renovating JV in its place. One thing we noticed with both of those was that the fields are actually much larger than they need to be, which is a good thing for the campus to address some of the other concerns. Softball outfield really wants to be about 200 or 210 feet for the outfield fence. These were much longer, closer to 220 to 230 out there, which allows us, I'll talk a little bit later, how it allows us to extend field number 2 next to varsity, current softball, but it also allows us to have some ability to work in accessible means of access up at the upper JV field to JV as well as field 8 that's next to it. And then looking also is making sure that this addressed spectator viewing in the bleachers and infield improvements and the warning track and items such as that. The second option that we looked at as we continued to develop was the potential of flipping JV and varsity. So looking at moving varsity up to where the current JV field, which is field 9, and then renovating field 1 to be varsity for that. And again, providing all of the Title IX requirements for the fields and the dugouts and the bullpens and kind of equal for both. And we did a comparative analysis of kind of pros and cons with both and really found that they were similar in nature. One of the things under the option 2 was that you could renovate the JV field while you're still using the varsity field. So then the new varsity field would come online and the old varsity would become JV. On the flip side, one of the positives of the lower is it does have a longer history. It's been a varsity field for a very long time. There's some nostalgia to that. It also gives you the benefit of having people be able to see, when games are on. The upper field is a bit secluded up in the back from being able to see. So we went through that process just to show that they are both viable options, whichever, if it is chosen to move forward, could be done. But for the plan, we further developed with looking at maintaining the varsity at the current location. And then we broke it down into 2 steps. So the first is simple maintenance improvements that could be gone and undertaken over the next few years with smaller amounts of money. Things such as just improving the irrigation system, replacing some of the broken heads, possibly looking at starting with smaller projects like dugouts or accessible ways, maybe batting tunnels as you're looking to fund or develop to do the bigger full project, which would be the renovation of the 2 fields. And I'll talk a little more about those towards the end. And then we moved on and did a similar approach to the JV varsity and varsity baseball fields. Looking at, again, here there happens to be a press box and a small concession, the bleachers, the dugouts. As far as baseball goes, baseball did renovate the home bleachers not too long ago. The visitor bleachers are still there. We did notice a few minor things like the visitor dugout. You can see here they have, when the roof was put on, some of the nails coming through the roof there, which we've learned is why at the end of the baseball season, if you walk by the visitor bleacher, has plastic bottles stuck to the roof. It's the athletes stick them there so that they don't hit their head or anything on those nails coming through. So they kind of get acquired on the roof at the end. But you can see the conditions there for that field. And then again, we did a similar process looking at some basic maintenance improvements that could be done smaller scale, such as the baseball field. There's a lip that currently is in the outfield and infield area there, and that just happens from over years of maintenance. The infield clay material starts to build up and you get a bit of a transition lip that could be cut down. Rebuilding of the mound, which happens, and some other minor things such as putting plywood on the top of that dugout and repairing irrigation. Looking more forward for full renovation, really renovating that varsity field to address not only those, but also off of third baseline, addressing that steep slope that happens for an athlete that's chasing a foul ball once they get over the foul line and it drops off by 8 or 10 feet, building that up and taking advantage of putting in a bullpen in that area when you do so, updating fencing, the lighting, batting cage, all of that is part of a full renovation project. We moved on to the track and field area, which was what we refer to commonly as the stadium portion of your facility, analyzing the track, your turf field, the bleachers on both home and away. For there, a few of the things we saw was that your turf field and track will be in the near future nearing the end of their lifespans. Your track
Excuse me, Luke.
are your, yep.
Can you admit me into the meeting? I'm logging in from a different device.
Oh, no problem. Let me switch my screen here. I forgot I have to play host here as well. All right, as soon as I see him come on, I will continue here. Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for reminding me on that. So to mention that the turf field will be nearing its end of lifespan, in the near future. So you want to plan for replacing that carpet. You're not going to look at replacing the entire drainage and all, but the carpet itself. Your track is also nearing the end of its lifespan. It's been recoated a couple of times. So you want to start planning for the replacement of that, the asphalt base and the track surfacing itself, as well as at the same time, most facilities we find will look at that opportunity to also do the track field events at the same time, shot put, discus, those kind of things. We did look at your bleachers, both home and away. Your visitor or away bleachers actually are newer in nature, that they have the accessible ramps and seating. The home bleachers, on the other hand, are like the track and field, nearing the end of their lifespan, not only for code reasons, such as you can see in the photos here, no handrails on the stairs. There's no screen on the back where the toe or the heel guards are. And then additionally, at the top here, you can see this style has just the 3 cables. Code now requires that actually be a chain link mesh, so that no opening is greater than 4 inches along the top of a bleacher for that. And then additionally, it's just the overall structure, steel structure, is nearing the end of its lifespan. So with that, we looked at, again, kind of maintenance-wise, just making sure you're continuing to groom the turf field as you're doing now. We did note that you may have some ancillary track repairs over the next few years while you wait for or plan for that replacement of the track, just to make sure that the track continues to be usable. And then it would continue into more of a renovation project of a replacement, eventual replacement of the bleachers and press box, the track surfacing, the turf surfacing, excuse me, and the the track events. And with that would be any accessibility and code. We also looked at, as part of that, the potential to upgrade the lighting system as part of a larger project, if you choose to, where you would look at not only converting your system to LED lighting, but also the potential of removing one of the 3 poles on each side. So instead of having a 6-pole system you have now, which puts a pole on either side right in the middle of your bleachers that everybody has to look through, removing that and going to 4 poles. So you'd have 2 poles on each side with LEDs rather than what's there. And I should mention, we also looked at lighting potential for baseball and softball as part of this too. I just didn't mention it. Continuing on, we looked at field number 2 and the tennis courts, which are adjacent to each other. Field number 2 is behind the stadium visitor bleachers, most commonly referred to as for field hockey or lacrosse. With that, one of the things we noted with that the comments let us know is just the where that is in the allowable space is that field is very tight. There's very little runoff area on the ends of that field because of softball on one side and the tennis courts on the other. The tennis courts, you can see here some of the cracks that are happening with the asphalt. They were repaired a year ago by town staff, but unfortunately what happens with asphalt, once it reaches a certain point in its life, you can repair the cracks, but they just keep coming back. And each time they come back a little bit larger. So you're kind of just chasing the problem with Band-Aids to keep it usable, but it's not a permanent solution for that. And you can see those here. We also determined that the courts, because of the time when they were built and put in, they don't meet the current federation requirements for their overall size. So the in-play area of the court is the correct size, but the run-out area where the tennis player is, which in this case on your courts is the green in color, are actually smaller than they should be. So with that, what we looked at, as I excuse me, mentioned before, again, maintenance-wise, just looking at, like on field number 2, replacing irrigation heads and things of that nature to make sure that at least the irrigation continues to work, and those tennis courts, looking at putting some money in the budget to continue those crack repairs so that the program can continue to function at the school till the tennis courts are reconstructed, or have a plan to utilize some of the other town tennis courts for that program as those cracks continue to develop or open back up for that. Because as Steve very well knows, that at any time an opposing team can come in and have an issue with any of the fields or courts. And if mentioned to an umpire or referee and the decision is made not to hold it, it does get reported back to the CIAC, and then you have to go through hurdles to show that you've corrected it. So when some of these things are happening, you just want to always have a contingency plan in case that comes out. Sometimes it's not under your control. With the renovation project, what we found, which was interesting, was when we talked about the varsity baseball and renovating that and shrinking the outfield to the proper size of the 200 or the 210, it allowed us to gain some extra room for field number 2, which lengthened it and gave the proper length, but it also allowed us to have the extra length required to now reconstruct your tennis courts at the proper size. So it really kind of solved both of those issues as part of that. But again, that makes for a much larger project overall when you combine the 3. And you can see that here in the lower, that by doing that and maintaining, obviously the ag science building can't be moved, and making those larger, you would go down to the 6 courts instead of 7 you have now. But that still is within regulation and plenty for your high school team. So, and I'll continue. I'm going to start skipping some of these fields. Have a lot of the same things we've talked about in the other, but not to kind of bore everyone. But we looked at the soccer and then the practice field way in the back, the football, much like the other grass fields, intermittent irrigation. Some of it was working. Some of the heads have just broken over time. The fields also, we found, just over time have become compacted and suffer from a bit of that. What we did find through our soil analysis is that your ag science group is doing a great job of providing the correct nutrients for all of your fields so that they have that. But the challenge they're faced with is the actual cross section of the fields. Excuse me, many of them are only about 3 or 4 inches of topsoil. And then below that, they have what we refer to commonly as a hard pan material, which is why, especially on field number 8, when it rains, it stays wet for days afterwards. And when the irrigation works, the fields are very green and they grow well, but when it doesn't work, they dry out very quickly because there's just not enough of the material out there, although the material that's there is very good with that. So you can see those existing conditions of those 2 fields. And then our recommendations there, much like the others for minors, is irrigation, top dressing, and then long-term planning to renovate those where you're incorporating some drainage within so that the water doesn't sit under or on top of that hard pan, and then top dressing so that you can get the proper depths of topsoil, as well as eventual replacement of scoreboards throughout the facility. The scoreboards, you've had the benefit of getting scoreboards from Central Connecticut as they've upgraded theirs. Unfortunately, what has happened is that those are starting to now reach the end of the life. And some of the boards that you have gotten, you've turned into parts boards for the other boards that are working, and those are now running out of parts. So it looks like as part of this, we'll be planning for eventual replacement of the scoreboards throughout the facility as well. So, and then we have the upper field, which is number 8, which I mentioned was the multi-use, and then the field number 10, which is the smaller half-size field down below. We did find that out of all of them, field number 8 does appear to stay, although it's at the highest elevation, does seem to stay the wettest after rains. So although it could potentially be used as a very good multi-sport or swing field, it's underutilized because it does just stay so wet, especially in the spring seasons. So looking at those 2, start with field number 10 is, looking at for the renovation there is finishing the process that was starting of filling, renovating that, turning that into the area where you can have your throwing events for track now so that they are together. So your throwers will be able to do discus and shot put right there together and not throw onto the other fields. And then also having the ability to have a half or 3/4 size field, which would allow for band to have an area where they can practice when they're not on the stadium turf field, but they're not affecting the other fields that are used by sports, because band does have a tendency to overcompact the field because of the repetitive marching motion that happens over and over again. So we found that that's a really great opportunity for that space. Field number 8, we looked at actually the potential of this being a primary location to either renovate as and keep as natural grass, but also to look at the potential of adding a second synthetic turf field to the campus. Because of the nature of the current conditions of the field, to bring it up to be able to be used, it really would take a major renovation anyway, with drainage and all of that because of the hard pan. What this would allow is it really gives you a secondary field that could be used for varsity games, JV games, allow you to rotate and have some downtime on some of your other grass fields, and they get the proper rest they need. And then the other benefit was it would allow for more use from the outside community organizations here on the campus that are constantly looking for fields and are challenged to do so during their seasons, as well as rentals. So with all of that, we then sat down and looked at kind of goals or objectives for a time frame. Again, starting with short term, looking at irrigation repairs, looking at field number 1, which is the varsity softball, starting to address some of those smaller repairs and improvements that were there, not only for playability, but also starting to address some of the Title IX equality issues that are at the field. A couple of those are just fencing repairs so that they don't continue to have issues with umpires looking at the fencing and potentially calling a game. Dugouts, accessibility, looking at removing the stockpile of material that I showed earlier on that's on the paved drive behind the varsity softball. That would open up that current accessible drive that's there now. It looks like it was stockpiled there at some point just because of the ease of access, and that could easily be moved to help with that. And then planning for some continued repair to the tennis courts if you are to continue to use them until you do a renovation of them. If not, planning on utilizing the community courts if the cracking continues before you replace them. Some of the other also the varsity baseball field that we mentioned is just continuing to monitor the lighting. Along third baseline, we know we have your leaning pole that's out there. It's checked on a yearly basis, the level to see, but make sure you're checking that. And then also looking at the fuse panel. It is a fuse panel in there for that. Looking at either upgrading that to breakers or just understanding that system at any time could potentially break and just be unusable, but thinking about that. Putting some plywood over that visitor dugout internal roof just to alleviate potential of any injuries. Renovations to that lip in the outfield. That's something that could be done as a small summer or fall project outside of season without a major. And then ongoing as necessary, making sure that the fence is still usable or replacing the orange yellow safety part on top and accessibility. Continuing short term, further review of the bleachers, looking at addressing a structural review, which will give you a better understanding of what would be entailed when the eventual replacement of that happens. And then also looking at the two code deficiencies that we brought up, which was the fencing along the top and or the handrail. And those are potentially projects depending on time frame for looking to fully renovate or replace those. And then lastly was continued track repairs. You can see here where you're starting to get the wearing out, again, like the tennis courts, just to be able to continue to use those each year until you fully renovate that. You want to plan for that over the next few years. And then we looked at kind of the intermediate. So this is really right in the middle of that 10-year plan. This is looking at the potential of lumping a bunch of projects together if worked out to either maybe borrow or bond or, do a big part of it so that you're minimizing the impact overall with the facility. And it's not ongoing for all over 10 years, but also potentially with the current rates and things of that nature, how that may play out. And this here kind of shows the fields and projects that were targeted in that middle portion of it, with an overall budget, in the $5 to $8 million range, depending on how they're selected and whatnot. And I'm going to I blew this up because I knew that was really small for everyone, but that would be starting here, finishing the renovation to the varsity softball field. So that's fully renovated, as well as the JV field. Looking at either renovating or converting field number 8 to synthetic turf. That would include the project where we would slightly shift the lacrosse field hockey and rebuild your tennis courts, incorporate the track replacement, the turf replacement, bleacher, press box on field number 3, address varsity baseball and JV baseball, and then potentially field number 10. And that would include the, things like drainage, making sure the irrigation is updated, fencing, walkways, spectator viewing, all of those kind of things, so that we're not only addressing code, but we're meeting federation guidelines for the fields and turning them back over that they're in kind of a higher level performance that then from then on to are just a maintenance piece of it rather than larger kind of capital improvement projects from there with that. And those are there. And then the closeout kind of over the remainder of the 10 years would be addressing any projects that were not under that larger intermediate phase, you know, depending on where or how the funding works out, if it's, you know, smaller or maybe broken into smaller pieces or maybe 2 projects, it would address the remainder of those items. So renovate the soccer field, some drainage, top dress, things of that nature, complete the rest of or any gaps in the accessible routes throughout the athletic complex, athletic buildings, concessions, restrooms, storage, and then also kind of future planning for once the track and tennis courts are renovated, you want to make sure you're planning ahead for the next resurfacings, which is not rebuilding, but just the, I call them the color coatings is what most people think of, but those that have to happen every 6 to 7 years over the 20-year lifespan of those. So those would kind of come up right at the end of that 10-year capital improvement plan for there. So that I know is a lot of information, so I certainly welcome questions and I can go back to anything as you want. I tried to summarize what we've been working on for 4 or 5 months here over the summer to give you all a big picture of it. So I appreciate you sticking with me through all of that, and I'll open it to any questions. Tim, would you like me to turn it back to you as the host?
Maybe he fell asleep. I don't know.
No, I had to unmute myself first. That's been
He was relaxing, not having to be the host
No,
for a
I think he
while.
fell
I don't
asleep,
blame him.
I think.
well, that's been the MO these days. How many times have we all been caught speaking when we're muted? So we have to pause and unmute ourselves. Yeah, I think that's fine, Luke. I don't think we'll have to, or unless are there any slides that anyone needed to go back to at this point in time?
Well, I have a question. May I ask the question?
Mrs. Carmody,
Absolutely.
you're the board chair. You can ask whatever question you would like.
Now, I know you're not going to think that I know very much, which is true, but can you tell me when you talked about the tennis courts not having enough, what did you say? Not enough space for the, you know, when the people hit the ball, whatever you call that, when they back up, you know, and hit the ball. And so therefore, if other teams, Valerie, stop laughing. This is a legitimate question. So
I can't help myself.
Valerie, be respectful. If other teams came to play like a tournament or whatever you call those things, they could refuse that our courts aren't good enough, right? Doug, I mean, I don't know. That's what somebody told me. My husband plays tennis, and that's what he told me. I don't know.
Yeah, so roughly each court is about 2 to 3 feet short. So when you add that up overall, you're approximately 8 to 10 feet short in the length where there's a battery of courts. So if someone were to come out and measure for a match, they very well could say that these do not meet. Now, they have the right, if both teams, say away and home, agree that, you know, it doesn't and they're grandfathered and they can play, then they can. But typically, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, from what I have seen, is the visiting team is usually the one that has the final say when coming in on conditions of a facility. Is that correct?
Yes, I would agree. I also think we've been fortunate because at the high school level, I think the bigger issue here for us, I think most schools understand that the courts may not be exactly the right length, but I think the bigger concern, obviously, at the tennis courts, Terry, are the cracks.
Yeah,
Because
I know that. I can see
that's
that.
where somebody could refuse to come because they think their kids are going
Right.
to overturn their ankle or something. So
Right.
I think the realistic concern is the repair of the cracks.
Yeah.
However, somebody could, one of the tennis powerhouses in the state might say, you know what, we're not playing on court. And I don't think, if my memory is correct, Luke, it's not every court that's shorter. Is it every court? I thought it was just half of the courts in the back were shorter, but I might be wrong on that.
They all vary are slightly shorter. The ones in the back have the more exaggerate, are shorter by larger amount. So
Because we have that,
as we went back through.
wall, we have that wall that was built in the back. I don't know how many people are familiar with the courts, but the back courts there, those back 4 courts have like a green wall back there. And I think that's part of it. That's why Luke's point is valid about if we ever did a major renovation to renovate them, we'd want to push out more towards the field hockey field because that's where the space is.
Yeah. So
Right in that
Steve
area.
was mentioning there's a wall, and there's also a series of transformer and some other things that are there that do limit that area. There's also some utility line here that we'd have to look at and be part of that as well. Yeah. And the problem, the courts of patching, everyone says, okay, can we patch? But the way that they are, and as you saw with the width of those cracks now, it's a specialty material that you do the patch there. It's slightly flexible, but allows the paint to be coated over it so you can play. It's about $25 to $30 a square foot just for the patch, and then they have to coat it. And what happens is as they get wider, how long that patch lasts decreases. So the first time you do it, you may get 2 seasons, and then they have to come back, and then it may last a season. And then from there, you're kind of patching every season, plus the cracks keep growing. So you're kind of, chasing this thing once you get into it, that the costs just exponentially grow year to year on a tennis court. Same with a track.
Those are the cracks that our folks already repaired. Those are not new cracks. Ones that we saw on the slides are those ones that because I know our guys did repair some cracks there. So are those the repaired ones that have reopened, or are those
Yes.
new, so to speak, to that surface?
No, those are opened back up. They were repaired and they've opened back. So now it would be that next level, that specialty material that has to be used and
Okay.
of course cost more with it.
Mm-hmm.
Bob has a question. Go ahead, Bob.
Bob.
Yeah, I want to be clear on the cost. I saw that the, let's see, the intermediate was what, 5 to 8 million. I did quick math on the short term. I came out with about 267,000. I didn't see any numbers on the long term. Do you have those numbers?
So the overall right now really is going to depend on, for the long term, what the final plan would be for this intermediate. So if the intent is to do the major kind of all of this stuff that's highlighted here, and you push closer to that 8 million, the long term, the end of that's going to be smaller because you're going to have less. If you do less of these, roll some of them into the later, it's going to be more, and we have to figure escalation. So what I have and will provide is in the overall master plan document, we have all of them individually broken out so that you have a menu for them, and then we can work to add in escalation and things like that. So for tonight, we want to kind of get bigger ballpark and get feelings on if it's in the right direction for short, intermediate, long term, and then we can narrow it down and more finalize it as we continue.
I think one of the issues, Bob, too, is that there are obvious repairs that need to happen. So how often do you invest money in repairs, and does that?
I like the tennis courts. I see there's a repair and then later on there's a replacement. Does it make more sense to eventually to just replace it? I mean, is that wasted money?
Yeah.
And the other question I have along that line is, are there Title IX things that we must do earlier on versus things that would be nice, but we don't necessarily have to do?
This whole thing started with the civil rights review.
Right, I remember that, yeah.
Correct. And the civil rights review, there's a Title IX piece, but there's also an ADA piece involved in there as well. The Title IX piece is the softball field and the comparability of facilities. So that's a must do for us.
Okay.
And it's long overdue and well deserved, quite frankly. So the things like the repairs to that, those are no brainers, but the renovation of that field, installing dugouts, The dugouts were an item that was cited by the state in
Right.
particular. Lights was another issue, but that's debatable, quite frankly, on whether the games go on the baseball field under lights. How long are those lights going to last? Not lights, not last, et cetera. But it's really the comparability of facilities is the Title IX piece. The ADA piece is accessibility.
Right.
And if you recall, the two middle schools and their athletic fields have a very nice ADA pathway, so to speak,
That's right.
all the way around.
Right.
The question that the person from the state asked, which I thought was a very logical question and a good question, was, okay, so you're a grandparent and your grandson or granddaughter is playing on the back soccer field, all the way in the back on field 7 in this particular grid, and you have a hard time getting around. You're in a wheelchair or you're using a walker. How are you going to get there? And that actually applies to quite a few of our fields, because this just grew. the fields evolved, and there really is no access,
Right.
no good access, if you will, to a lot of places on our fields. So that was a part of it. So anything we have to do has to take into consideration the Title IX piece, which we have to do right away. And as we do that, obviously we have to take into consideration the ADA piece. So it's really important to have done this full study, because it's the proverbial pond in which you throw the pebble. There's the ripple effect. You do one thing affects other things. And in this particular case, you can see it with the softball field, the size of the softball field, which then has an impact on the lacrosse field, which then has an impact on the tennis courts. There are a lot of interconnected parts here that we've tried to cram all in together. And one of the things that we're going to have to do is try to do the very best that we can to make the improvements, and doing so within a more comprehensive plan as opposed to just one-offs.
Any other board members with questions? I can't see all the board members.
I think Mr. Brown is raising his hand again.
Oh,
Yeah, I have a bunch of questions about the funding. If you recall, Mr. Cannell, we met, I don't know, was it 2 years ago, with the guy in the tennis courts?
Mhm.
And he mentioned something about the tennis association has money that they actually might be able to use towards something like tennis courts. Is that something we'll look into?
I think we have to revisit that. A gentleman came in and
Right.
chatted with us, and they seemed very willing to do that. I mean, all of that, of course, was pre-pandemic, so we'll see where they are
Yeah,
now. But yeah, I thought of that as well.
right, okay.
Yep.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
the USTA does have a grant process. Part of that process is you do have to have the overall plan. You have to have schematic plans, a budget, and that. So we certainly can help you with if that's something that you're looking at. It's a good opportunity for some money under a grant application for that. For those, for sure.
Other board members, I can only see a few board members, so you'll have to.
Terry, this is Joe. I had a couple questions.
Go ahead, Joe, because I can't see you. Go ahead.
Yep, no problem. So I did have a couple of questions. I know that we talked about the different lighting systems, and I know in the past there's been not necessarily complaints, but because of where the high school's positioned, there are neighborhoods and things like that. Are there any sort of mitigation techniques with the newer technology that we can have less, I guess, light pollution that would affect the neighborhood aspect of things? Or, is that something that we'd necessarily think about in this plan? Or
Did you say lights
Sure,
in neighborhoods? Joe, is that what you said?
lighting? Yeah. So
okay.
like that.
Yeah.
I know we talked about
Right.
the six pole lighting to the 4-pole lighting and that kind of thing, and possibly doing the lighting for the softball fields. So I was just curious, are there mitigation techniques? I know the current lighting system for the track and field, there is a fair amount of light pollution that transfers over into into the neighborhoods across the street on Pleasant.
Sure. So I can answer a little and give a little history on how lighting for sports fields has changed.
Sure.
Any field that you're going to look at new lighting, obviously, will have to go through the land use process. So we'll have to submit drawings, which will include photometric plans and be reviewed. But what we found is that as the light technology has increased, two things have happened. So one is light poles have gotten taller, which many people think is actually worse for neighbors, but in fact, it's better. And there's two reasons why. When the lights are taller, they shine more of a straight down onto the field. So it lights the field better for athletes. Whereas when they're lower, they project out at an angle, which causes the glare into the neighbors sitting across the street. So think of it, if you're standing there and then a car drives by, those headlights right in front of you are going to point directly at you. But if you have a flashlight that you point straight down at the ground, it's not going to affect you if you're, 10 or 15 feet away. So that's happened. They also have new shields that go on where the light cutoff and the spill can be regulated right behind the posts. So they will light the field and not light behind them. The third part of it also is controls. They're actually able to be controlled now through a smartphone. Steve can download an app for all the lights if you get new lights on, and he can turn them on and off right from his office or other places. So you no longer have either a lock and key or have them on just at night, because there maybe he can literally get a text or a call from a coach that a game ended early, can you shut the lights off, and he can just turn them off. So there's a lot of new things with the newer lighting technology that would be looked at if one of these projects were to upgrade or add lighting throughout.
Tim, have there been, with Joe's questions, have we received a lot of complaints about the lighting from neighbors? Tim, I'm not aware.
I have not, but I do know it's a consideration.
It is, sure.
Certainly just to be good neighbors and good, members of the
Right.
of the community. I think as well as I do, if you look up during the fall
Yeah.
and the lights are on, and marching band is out there practicing or football's out there practicing, that you can see them from a good way away.
Yeah.
And I know traveling from my house, of course, I live on the on the west side of town. Traveling down the hill there, I can see the lights clearly as I start down the Curtis Street Hill. The other consideration is if there ever was a lighting project for the softball field, we do have some residences which are fairly close by. So that's absolutely a
Yeah, that's right. We really
consideration.
do.
No, thank you very much. I really appreciate the explanation of that. Again, Terry, it's not that I've heard complaints about it. It's just
Oh, yeah, Joe, I didn't.
like
I just want-
like Tim had said, it's we're partners with the community, and it's just a matter of being neighborly and whatever we could do to sort of cut that down. Because growing up right across the pond over there, my parents used to have the screen door open, and we'd listen to the marching band play when I was a kid. I was just a kid in elementary school at that point. So a lot of fond memories of what we do at the high school there. The other sort of two questions. Well, one's more of a statement. I can't say, the softball fields have been a long time coming for the girls, the Lady Knights there, and how many state championships and everything else. This is something that's absolutely long overdue for what we're doing, and I think it's great. Certainly, the plan seems excellent in regards to those two fields, the varsity and the JV. And I'm curious, Tim, have you gotten any feedback as we were coming up with the plan as far as what the preference would be for the varsity field staying where it is versus going up to that upper field area?
I have not. We could ask Mr. Risser, who's here.
Well,
If
Joe,
you-
I think Tim and Joe, I think the timing of that question is good, because now that we've done sort of the initial study here, and we all know these studies sort of they get created and then things sort of evolve. But I think in my limited tenure here, I've realized that there is a tradition of having it where it is now. So I'm glad to see that is a realistic option. However, I'm glad we're looking at both options. And I think the stakeholders, somewhat to my surprise, the current coach, Davina Hernandez, when we were doing the walk with her, Luke, she was very open-minded to going to, in terms of how the accessibility is, depending on the work that we do. I thought she would be one that would be totally against like a move. But what I would recommend to Mr. Cowan is we get our stakeholders sort of together along with Mr. McCoy and sort of look at those pros and cons. And they may help us make that decision, because I think it's a very close decision. I don't know if you agree, Luke, but as you saw on the page, there's pros and cons to each. So I think the way to do it is engage our stakeholders in it and see how we work with the architects and see what works for us. It's a close call, I have to be honest.
I think our alumni would have something to say about that as well. I know Mrs. Danello was in favor of moving those fences in and wondered why it didn't happen when she played there.
Tim, can I mention something?
Oh, sorry.
Absolutely.
Well, I don't know, Valerie, be careful.
Yeah, you have to ask Mrs. Carmody.
Can I ask Mrs. Carmody?
Yeah, she may speak, Valerie, go ahead.
Thank you. So so just a couple of things. I just wanted to thank you all for doing this. I think it's excellent for this entire project. I do have the varsity assistant coach sitting next to me, and Steve, I think she feels very similar to the head coach, Davina, that either of those options could be really beneficial. One thing that I think is important is the road, the concern with the road where the field is right now. The varsity team does seem to, there's a lot of foul balls that get hit into the road, a lot of line drives. So I'm wondering, Luke, is there going to be maybe a bigger backstop if the field stays there, the varsity field? The other question I had about the softball is definitely with the Title IX issues. If the short-term work is done, and that how compliant would we be with just the short-term work being done? Because the intermediate work might take a few years. Where would that put us, I guess, as far as Title IX?
I can respond to. Each year we are at, with the exception of this past year when the state was basically closed down, each year we are asked by our friends at the state where we are with our plan, because we had quite a few things that we've done. Everything from the size, not necessarily the content, but the size of the signage inside the high school, to some lighting, partner seating in the auditorium, sound field system in the auditorium. So there were a lot of things that were involved in what we had to do in terms of our voluntary action plan. So the state itself, they will be satisfied if they see that there is a plan and that we are making progress toward meeting the ultimate goals, which is making those facilities for our girls equitable. So, for example, if the first stage, the repairs all have to happen anyway. You know, the things that are safety issues, those have to happen regardless.
Right.
But if the idea is to, okay, let's assume we keep the field where it is. Keeping the field where it is, one of the things that needs to happen right away, in addition to the repairs, is that those dugouts need to happen. And you know, they need to be comparable. The facilities need to be comparable. That was a very, very specific item that was raised, and you would want that anyway. You know, that's reasonable. So you can do that and be on your way to compliance, and the state would be happy with that. And then they would say, okay, then what else are you going to do? And when is it going to happen? The when question is really important. So we have had a number of years when I've been saying, you know, we're trying, but we ran into some financial difficulties in 17, 18, and then we finally got the study funded now. And of course, we had the pandemic hit. So there are a number of mitigating factors in there, but we're continuing to make progress on just about every area in that voluntary plan. And so I think there would be some agreement on the part of the state that we're making good faith efforts, but we actually have to have some product. And I think the product there, especially for that softball field, is the condition of the field, you know, the backstop, all that stuff, but primarily the dugouts. I think that's a big issue. And then, you know, accessibility.
Right, that makes sense, Tim.
Yeah.
And if the fields were going to be switched, if the varsity field was going to be moved to the back, would that be something that would be done sooner than later?
Honestly, I think you would have to do it. Anything
Right.
when this all started, my humble priority, number one, was we addressed the softball field. We have a lot of needs because as Mr. Risser pointed out, other than the turf field being put in, there really have not been very many improvements to the athletic facilities. And that's something that we need to start paying attention to, because as you know, if you don't pay attention to certain things, the problems just increase over time and multiply. And where we are right now is we're not in an untenable situation, but we do need to work on that so that we can get back to a point where we know all of our facilities are safe for our student athletes. They're safe for our spectators. People can get where they need to be. We're providing equitable services. And then of course we need to put them on a regular schedule of maintenance so that we're not in a situation where we say, oh gee, we've got 30 irrigation heads that are broken and we never knew that.
Right.
So those are it's common sense really if you think about it. We're just a little bit behind schedule.
Very generous.
Well,
Thank you.
there's
Thanks. Thank you for letting me, be on this meeting and to, to see this firsthand.
Well, we're glad you could join us. I did, through Mark, I did extend this invitation to everyone on the town council and the Board of Finance. I know the Board of Finance was meeting tonight, which I actually didn't think of when this whole thing took place, but
Right.
we are being recorded, and folks will have the opportunity to look at the recording and see the presentation, and hopefully be able to ask some questions too, which we can funnel through to Luke or Mr. Risser, who is rapidly becoming more expert than he already is at facilities.
Yes.
Thanks to Luke.
Yeah.
But Val, if I may,
And I'll,
Val, Luke, you may want to talk about, to Val's point, Luke, about how the field might have to be shifted a little bit for that softball, for the foul ball issue. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So I think that goes to Tim's comment as well. As it's not just about the playability of the fields and the Title IX or the code, but also safety of athletes and spectators. So some things we're seeing now with baseball, softball fields is change of the backstop designs. When you renovate a field, is we've removed the overhang that happens on a lot of them, because ball goes up, it hits that, it comes straight down on the catcher or the umpire. They love having that come right back at them. So we've gone to taller, straight up ones. We've moved to looking at continuing those down the first and third baseline so that the spectator seating in the bleachers is protected. Not necessarily from more of the really high pop-up foul ball, but those line drive foul balls that come right off the bat, just make it over that 6-foot or 4-foot fence. And let's be honest, these days with technology, people are on their phone, they're not fully paying attention, and it's becoming more of a safety concern when it comes right off, especially when, as you come past the dugouts, we want to try and angle that spectator seating a little bit to get a better view. It puts them right in line with foul balls. So countering that, most new facilities, when we renovate or design new, we're continuing that ball netting system out. Depending on the location, it's 20 or 30 feet tall. So it's not really an eyesore. It's a black mesh. You really don't even see it when you drive by, other than the poles there. So that would be something that's looked at for all of the fields as we renovate them. JV, varsity, kind of just understanding that varsity baseball, surprisingly enough, on the first baseline, you know, they have the parking lot there up at the school as well. And the coach said, knock on wood, I'm probably going to jinx it because I'm saying it, but he says they have never hit a car in the parking lot in all of the years, that somehow it always lands in the open space where there isn't a car whenever they have a foul ball on that line. So, you know, that's another area where we'd look at that netting as well to help alleviate that. Again, you can't stop them all. You know, there are going to be those that are, you know, they're almost straight up and down that would make it over, but we try and eliminate, or at least give people the ability to react to it when it happens.
The orientation of the softball field is a little funky though, you know.
Correct. So that was the other, I know we went through it quickly, but the current JV field is actually oriented in
Correct.
a better orientation for sun glare for athletes in the late afternoon, which is when most of the games are. So if you read the letter of the law and the requirements, you know, the regulations, they recommend a north by northeast orientation for baseball, softball fields. But when you actually put that into play, it doesn't always work because of the time of most high school games, right? In that late afternoon, right when the sun's coming over. So we would look to try and address a bit of that if the varsity field stayed where it is, but there's only so much you can do to reorient that as there. But if the intent is you really want to address it, you know, we certainly can look at, you know, switching the entire backstop around and making it so that it orients the same way as the upper, which then, you know, we just have to look at how the first and third baseline foul balls now affect either the neighbor area or that would be adjacent to, actually it'd be the space in between the upper JV and the stadium field there with it. But either way, we can certainly look at those as if it moves forward to a project.
What was the consensus, Steve Risser? What did you say? You spoke with the coaches, the preference of moving the field. They didn't care either way.
The present leadership in Val and the assistant can weigh in here. I don't see the assistant. Who's here with us, Val?
So, Michelle, my
Michelle.
wife, Michelle, yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Steve.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good.
So Terry, see, the answer to that is, and Michelle, I didn't talk to you specifically, but Davina and I talked representing the coaching staff. And the feeling was, Terry, is that they're keeping an open mind about it. There was no consensus. They're kind of, the good work that Luke's done here. They're impressed with the thoroughness of it. And they're, like, I think the last point that Luke brought up about the orientations of the field is a valid point to be looking at as well. So I think I'd like to, and anybody's interested in coming on it, Tim, I'd like to maybe get a little group together to work with Luke on sort of narrowing in on, because we are going to have to make a decision. If we put dugouts in the short term,
Right.
before we do all the major renovations, we have to make sure that can fit it. They have to go on the right field.
Yes.
Obviously. So we're going to have to make sure that as we creep towards compliance with OCR, whatever we do has to work in the long-term plan. So we do have to, as Tim's priority all along, as he said, this project got launched by the softball concerns. So we have to make sure that we know what we're doing when we do everything.
Yes.
When we take each step, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, you have to make that decision first, right? I mean,
Yeah, where it goes.
Yeah, that's a great point, Steve. I appreciate that. And I know the softball coaches do. And, you know, and even the alumni, I think would be okay seeing these great renovations being made if the field was flip-flopped. You know, I think they just want to see something that really gets something done, you know?
I think it would be interesting to have some of our former players who are not too far removed, but yet 2 or 3 years removed from high school, provide some feedback, because, you know, as you move into your college years beyond that, your perspective changes a little.
Right.
And I think if you get too far away from it, you know, you kind of lose a little bit. But it would be interesting to have some of our former players who are maybe 2 or 3 years post high school just provide some feedback and perspective, and see if that helps us. It may not.
Right.
I think
Good
that was
point.
his nice way of saying those alumni that are so far removed that didn't have a fence in the outfield and actually played their games in the evening at Recreation Park, but still did win two state championships without a field fence there. But
Yeah,
Way
no
to
offense
go,
taken,
Sherry.
Mr. Cannellan.
I was waiting for you to weigh in, Mrs. Danilo.
No offense taken.
Sherry.
Can I weigh in also?
Yes, Bob, go ahead. You coached it. Go ahead.
This may shock you, but I was actually the assistant coach when that field was built. And I do remember playing at Rec Park, and I was the coach with Joe Piazza on that field. And let me just tell you, the foul ball issue is a major issue. We
Yeah.
had to have
It is.
players get through the fence and chase balls in a row with cars going by.
Yeah, you're right.
All you're
They-
worried that
right.
the ball's gonna hit the car in the windshield,
Yeah.
which I did see happen.
Still happens.
Yeah.
So there is an issue, and I, as someone who won state championships on that field with Joe and stuff, I would have no problem switching the fields. And I do remember, Sherry, when we didn't have a fence at all, because Coach Piazza didn't want a fence.
That's
No
right.
fence, and there were no houses. It was an open field. You took a bucket and you
She's
picked up
right.
balls.
Yeah.
He also
Bob.
wanted, when they built the fence, to be farther than the approved distance. 'Cause
Bob, you said you were there when the field was built, Bob. What year was that?
You're asking me a year?
Probably 76, 77, 19, right?
Because I was,
High-
yeah.
The first state title was 1978.
Let me think. First state title was not on that field. The first state title, like Sherry said, was at Rec Park.
The high school opened in 74.
Yeah,
That's
no,
probably
I
when
thought
it was
there.
built.
And no, it was not built in 74. No,
Oh, okay.
the high school was built.
Maybe
We
it's-
played game. We took a bus,
we did, yeah, that's
or,
right.
or actually we drove cars to Rec Park to practice and also to play games. We
Yeah.
played night games there too. I remember Robbie Lightford hitting 2 home runs against Bristol Central at Rec Park. I mean, we could probably, and Sherry, I know, knows a lot of stories too, go back for years. But no, that field was built after the high school.
Well, we played
Okay.
on the field in the 80s. We just played our games under the lights at Recreation Park. So if we played in the afternoon, we played at the high school.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But it wasn't, that field wasn't built when the high school was built though.
No, like I said, the high school was 74, which was
It was.
pre-Title
I
IX.
remember walking out there.
Right.
And there were quite a few high schools, including the high school where my wife and I attended, who didn't have softball teams. You know, Terry and
Yeah.
our friend Jan started the softball team at North Haven High School. So it was very common in those days to not have softball teams at high school. So I could easily see that not starting until the late 70s, quite honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, I started the softball team at Kennedy with John Boris at Apollo. And sure you
So-
went to.
Can I ask a question?
Who, I don't see who it is.
It's Mr. Oshana.
Yeah, yeah.
Mr. Oshana has a question.
Thank you. Hey, first off, I know, Val, someone mentioned something about the number of state championships and you were muted, but I saw you say the number. How many are there?
They're 18.
Good to know. So I just thought I'd let you say that with the mic on instead of the mic off.
Yeah, yeah, 18.
Couple of questions. So this did start with the prep for Title IX, and it grew and expanded into a much more robust and comprehensive field study, which makes a whole lot of sense because you touch one thing, it's going to affect another, it's going to affect another. But Tim, you said, I mean, that we need to do the Title IX and the accessibility stuff. But I started writing some numbers and I wasn't fast enough to complete to be Title IX compliant. What is that cost? I mean, that's not just the short term, it's short and intermediate, I think, were the numbers. I think I got the short term was somewhere between 47,500 and 62,500. But what is it? What's the total cost to be compliant?
Sure.
That's a
So,
good question. You're talking just Title IX, or, you know, once you start
Just
doing,
at this point, just Title IX.
okay. So the work on the softball field, not including the accessibility stuff, which I'm not clear you can't do if you're doing a good size renovation, but be that as it may. What Luke, so what ballpark I think it's somewhere in that $100,000 range, is it not?
Most likely more to meet, because it's kind of twofold, because you're cited for softball kind of in it. But as you do that, we need to make sure that we're addressing anything at baseball. So in the end, you're not flip-flopping that now baseball is not equal as well. So, you know, you would have some minor things at baseball that would have to be done with it, like the visitor bleachers, which don't match the home bleacher, which wouldn't match, or visitor dugout at baseball that wouldn't match the home dugout and wouldn't match the dugouts now at softball. So there's be a few pieces that are there. You're talking about, you know, how far do you go? Do you do the minimum to say, you know, address the fencing and the dugout so it matches, and then you are in that, you know, maybe 150, you know, $200,000 max, or are you doing the full field renovation kind of long term because it's better use of money? That to renovate the two is probably, you know, a typical softball field type renovation is in the $400,000 to $500,000 range. When you talk about fencing, accessibility, bleacher, dressing the scoreboard, you know, you're talking full bullpens, you know, the whole kind of field, irrigation, drainage, all of that, and then some ancillary stuff at baseball.
And so that all ties into the whole project, right? Because you're going to do step by step by step. So I guess the next question I was,
Right.
You can't just do part of this. It becomes a full-fledged, long-term, interrelated project. So in looking at that, I go back to prioritization. How do you, I mean, I saw on one of your charts, you had 1A, 2, 3. How do you go through as you start identifying, dealing with the Title IX stuff, getting into the ADA and accessibility stuff, and flushing through the rest of the project? How do you ultimately go about setting that priority, first, second, third, onward and outward to the 10-year mark?
So we really just kind of help facilitate for you all to set kind of the priority. You know, we take the information, help you sort through, and then it's a combination of things. You know, every town or city is different with, you know, certain thresholds per year that you can spend without having to borrow that allows you to piecemeal it. Some communities right now, because of bonding rates and borrowing is so low, they would rather, they know that the project is going to cost less if they do it all as one project rather than piecemeal over 3 years. So they say, let's bond it and renovate it and just do it. Others are at the point where we had one where they called us because their track was basically condemned by CIAC and they had nowhere else to go, but their track program was huge. And so they found the money and had to do it that summer as a project. So it was kind of forced upon them. It's a combination of all of those. I think for this one in particular, the immediate is not only having a plan, but showing a little bit of a good faith effort that you're starting to address the Title IX, because as Tim mentioned, you've kind of put them off a few times. You've responded that you're thinking about it, you're going to do something. And at any time they can come back without an extension or say enough is enough. We've seen that in the past. They're somewhat lenient, but if they feel that it's actually not progressing in any way, they will come down fairly hard on you, and then you have them on your back. So it's something to at least show that. And then
Alexa,
from there, it's
when is the next issue of Titans?
And then the next is really just kind of what fits within the community for funding and
Alexa,
available
when
monies
is the next
and that.
issue of Titans?
Alexa doesn't know. I don't think Alexa knows.
Alexa's not quite sure.
That's kind of
but-
why yeah. And that's really the next part of this process is coming to all of you, presenting it all, and then figuring out what fits here.
Because I think going back to a statement that was made earlier, I mean, to temporarily fix something to then a few years later tear it down and to actually rebuild it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The only place where I could potentially see that being a logical move is the safety of the bleachers, putting the handrails up, putting the fencing in the back. And I don't know, walking up those bleachers, I don't know, you didn't mention it as a requirement, but the kick plate the riser in the back. I don't know if that's a requirement, but you put those
Alexa,
things up.
when is the next episode of Titans?
Who is
What's
doing?
that?
It's
Somebody's
Chris Palmieri and he doesn't realize he's not muted. Now he's muted.
I
I was just gonna text
I
him.
just realized
I want to know when
I'm
that
still the
next
host,
episode is.
so-
I want to know.
Let us know, Chris.
But does that make, I mean, I think that makes sense. I'm not sure what everyone else's thoughts are, but I think as you go through, because I don't know when, and we've talked about rebuilding the bleachers since
A long
those
time.
original bleachers
Long
went up,
time.
I think, right? So,
Yeah.
but I do think the safety side of things, that's the only one I can see that you probably want to do a temporary fix before the
Yeah.
final gets done.
Right.
Yeah,
But
I think
thanks for the explanation. By the way, great presentation, really well laid out, presented as well. So thank you.
And can I piggyback off of what Zaya was saying? Because I'm just thinking what started all this disparity between the baseball and the softball was the Diamond Club, the booster club for the baseball team that fundraised and got the dugouts and I think the box that's there. They did a lot of work, let's put it that way, which
Yes.
the softball team didn't have that size of a booster club. So I guess my question is, how involved, Tim, Steve, Luke, do you see the booster clubs getting in this process? Are we looking to them for help? Are we thinking that we're going to finance this with the town, with the cooperation of the town? Or are we looking to the booster clubs at all for either any of the financial support or actually the work that needs to be done? Because I was also under the impression that, say, for the baseball fields, a lot of the work that's done out there is done by the booster club. I may be wrong, but there was always seemed to be parents out there. So I'm just wondering what their role is in this project.
so. I actually have two comments
Okay.
related to that. Is I would love for the booster clubs to be involved and perhaps in help in fundraising for certain aspects of it. Once, as a school district / community, you accept whatever gift comes to you, whether that is in the form of dugouts or scoreboard or whatever it is, you own it. And you're now responsible for making sure your facilities are equitable. So there were a lot of donations and there was a lot of work done. And what we didn't do as a district or as a community was say, no, we can't do that until we have something equitable on the other side. We just kept saying yes, which I think is,
Well, it was all very piecemeal how things were done.
It was all great stuff too, right?
Yeah, it was great
Nothing
stuff,
bad.
but it was all very,
Right.
there was no
Correct.
master plan, which,
Correct.
yeah.
Exactly. And I think a plan is it's so absolutely important. But you can see a lot of this is maintenance that has to be done, that should have been planned, over the course of time. For example, look at the track. That's wear and tear. And it's going to happen on those types of tracks. Those are not the old-fashioned cinder tracks. So it's going to have wear and tear, just like the turf field. We know the turf field is 3, 4, 5 years down the road, and there's a plan for that. And there are funds set aside in the enterprise fund, to do that. That there's never been a plan like, what are we going to do when the fields are so compacted? We need to do something with them. So our fields are just always used. We have so many activities. And again, there's nothing malicious involved there. It's just you're trying to keep things going for kids all the time. So the booster club question, I think is a good one. And I think it would be wonderful to get all of our major booster clubs for our varsity and sub-varsity sports at the high school and activities involved to a certain extent, but if they can help, that would be great. It's not on them, it's on us as a community to make sure that we do the safety improvements and the routine maintenance. And if there's some assistance that they can provide, it's probably in fundraising. We have had some issues. Well, I do like to say that this one little story. Probably in my first year here, towards the end of my first year here, I was walking out toward, I think I was walking out toward a softball game actually, and I'm walking on Pleasant Street, and I looked over, and somewhere over by the football field, I see the yellow of this machine parked there. And I said, what is that machine doing parked there? Well, no one knew. And come to find out, it was a booster club, and someone left money to the lacrosse teams to put in a wall, throw the ball against a rebound wall. And the booster club had the money, and someone had rented a backhoe, and they were going to go out there literally and dig a trench and I'm assuming pour footing and a foundation and build this wall. And I'm like, no, you're not. And is that insured? Do you have insurance on that machine? Please get that off our property in the next 24 hours. So there was a lot of that went on. Since Peter Romano has been on board, there's no more of that, because we channel everything through Peter's office, and everything is done by licensed contractors, and we might have some other help, or we might have fundraising going along with it, but it's done appropriately, so it's done safely, and we have insurance coverage to make sure that the town, that that the community is protected. So we do things a little differently these days, and I think that's an improvement. It's absolutely something that we a change that we needed to make. But I'd love to have all those folks involved and help out with with certain aspects of the project by doing some fundraising. That'd be great.
Mr. Kennelly, if I may ask, we obviously have to do something with Title IX for the girls softball field. That's our first priority. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Right. And then we as a board have to decide whether we want to go through with upgrading all of the facilities, which to me seems to make the most sense to do that. I don't know how we're going to fund that. It would have to, certainly we have to work with the town and bonding or whatever. But what are you looking for from us as a board?
Well, right now, more for, I guess, understanding and asking questions and seeing the information. You will see in our capital plan coming up that there are some dollars that are going to be set aside and requested. We're going to make the request that those go into the capital plan that our town manager is involved in putting together for the beginning of those improvements, at least moving forward with some improvements to the softball field initially. So you're going to see that as part of the capital plan, which you'll see on Thursday, actually, at least as a first read. And then I think beyond that, Mrs. Carmody, it bears discussion. I think we need to sit down and have a discussion, and we need to bring some of our folks in. It was great that Mr. Paulo was here this evening, and I know folks will look at the presentation of that Luke put together. At least I hope they will. Members of the Board of Finance and members of the Town Council. Mr. Shota was involved in a previous presentation that we had that was just a preliminary, if you will. So he's aware of it, and Mr. Romano has been involved. So it warrants a larger discussion on not if we're going to do this, how and when, the timing of it, because you can clearly see all of those things. A lot of it is routine maintenance, and much of it is safety related.
Right.
Those are the types of things we're entrusted by this community with all of these facilities. And so we're stewards of these facilities, and we have to make sure that there's a plan there to maintain them on a regular basis, just like the brick and mortar parts of the facilities that we have. So that's really what I wanted to do, was to begin the dialogue, have a little bit of a frame of reference moving forward for at least the initial part of this, so that we can begin to resolve the Title IX issues right away and resolve some of those other issues regarding the softball field, fence or not. That's something that we absolutely need to do, and then continue the dialogue about how we're gonna do the long-term part of that. That's going to be in the best interest of this community, because it's always in the best interest of the community to maintain the gift of facilities that we have. We have beautiful facilities, so we have to find a way to maintain them.
All right. Do I have
Terry, I just want to build off that one last comment that Tim
who's
said.
this, Joe?
This is Joe. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, Joe.
So Tim, I agree 100% as far as, you know, not only do our students utilize portions of our athletic montage of what we have to offer, but I certainly know the public does.
Yeah.
And I just want to shift gears really quick to the tennis courts, and, you know, sort of understanding the whole, you keep throwing Band-Aids on things, but then, you know, you fast forward 3 or 4 years and we could have renovated and completely fixed everything and now completely start the timeline over again. I'm wondering, and maybe Luke, you could weigh in on this a little bit. Certainly the softball field, I really think that we should try and whether that looks like through bonding or something like that, that we really just do that now, or as soon as possible, make that the priority, but maybe at the same time too, because the tennis courts get utilized by our community, you know, if it would be worthwhile, maybe while we're doing that as well, to sort of have those be our two big projects, and in conjunction with that, doing the safety recommendations. And then just a side note, as far as the ADA access, Tim, you used the example of like an elderly grandparent or anything. Is there anything that we could do in the meantime as far as offering like a multi-passenger golf cart or anything like that to be able to get people around, or does that turn into a liability issue?
No, we actually do that now, Mr. Buczewski.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
we do have multiple golf carts, and when we see folks, we always make sure that folks are offered the opportunity to have a ride. And I know Mr. Risser makes sure that our ADA accessible parking
Sure.
is available for folks. We've made that a priority. In the past, we have always reached out through our student athletes to say, if you have parents or grandparents who have a disability or have trouble getting around, or just you literally just have some mobility issues, let us know, and
Sure.
we'll help out. So our folks have been great. Mr. Ferry was great about that beforehand. Mr. Risser is wonderful about it, and we do have the the ability to do that. We really just want to create a sense of accessibility and independence for folks.
Right.
Even though some of our fields are pretty far away, and so some of our folks who
I
come
played on just about every single one of them, and
yeah,
I never enjoyed going to the football training field for lacrosse scrimmage when that top field was soaked through and through.
Mrs. Clark spent a lot of time down on that back football practice field. And I also, walking down there one day, broke and cracked my elbow. So yeah, it wasn't at the time, it wasn't very accessible. It was very rocky, but you know, people sat on the hill and watched the games. There wasn't a lot of places for quote the seniors and the grandparents back then, but golf carts always brought them down or whatever. I mean, we've always tried to be as accommodating as possible, but obviously I think we can do better.
And Joe,
I'm not disputing that, Colleen.
Joe, I was one of the ones that they offered to put in the cart. You believe that, Joe?
Yeah, but we'd cart you out of the facility, not into the facility.
Was it a cart or an ambulance?
I don't know, Joe. One or the other. I am going to, if there are no other questions, and I to expedite this, I can't thank you enough for the presentation. It was very thorough. We certainly have a lot to think about, and as a board, we have to come to some kind of conclusion of how we're going to do this with our community. We are certainly a town that values our athletic teams. I definitely feel that our girls should be given certainly the type of field that they deserve. And not that I understand anything about sports, but I don't understand if we do something with the softball field now, we have to meet certain things with the softball field, but then we also have to consider what it's going to do to I think this is what you said, Luke, it's going to impact the tennis fields, the field hockey thing. So we've really got to think about this very carefully.
Mhm.
Okay, that's how I feel right now.
We do.
Anyone else before we sign off? Luke, it was an excellent presentation. I thank you very much. We do have a lot to think about, and I think you probably know that Southington is a community that values very seriously our sports. So
Oh, absolutely. I coached next door in Bristol for about 10 years, so I know.
we don't like Bristol,
sports.
Luke.
Oh, I know.
You know,
I know. I waited till the end to
No.
mention that. Notice I
Yeah,
wanted to get in your good graces first and then mention that after. But
Luke, you did get in our good graces, but I like
No.
to beat Bristol when we play them, you know? So.
yeah, no
Anybody
problem.
else?
No, and again, as was mentioned, it's really a roadmap. You know, it's flexible. You know, it's the start. It can be molded. And in the end, we didn't talk a little bit, the part of the end of the report also talks about the ongoing maintenance and working with your ag science program to see how we can help them. Do they need maybe some more equipment or others to further extend? But then also setting up the district in the long run, once you do these renovations, to make sure you're able to take them on, budget properly for the maintenance so that they stay at that level that they're at once you rebuild them, so that you're not back in this way in 5 years. But that's kind of later on in the process.
Luke, they've done a wonderful job.
Thank you.
That's really, so I thank you. So I guess that concludes our meeting, Mr. Cannell, unless you have something you'd like to add.
No, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Luke. Luke, if you could turn it back to me now so that I can end the
I
recording.
am
And we just need a
looking right
motion.
now at how to do that.
You just
Luke,
go
I
up to
can
my,
help you.
just go up to
Yeah,
my
there
name,
we go.
slide over to more and.
Make you the host.
David, are
There we
you
go.
making?
Hey,
That is
move
correct.
to adjourn?
Bob?
All
Okay.
those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Everyone, enjoy the rest of the evening. And again, Luke, thank you. Bye-bye.
Good
Thank
night, all.
you.
Take care,
Good night,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
8:40.
Thanks, Terry.
Bye, Valerie. It's been a
Bye-bye.
pleasure.
Okay, take care, all right?
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Steve,
So-
thank you, Steve Risser. Thank you. Mr. Pepe, you didn't eat tonight.
He's gone. He missed it.
He missed it, huh? Tell him what I said.
I will.
Good night.
All right. Oh, no,
Frank-
he's back. He's
Frank,
back.
did you hear me? Is he put his microphone on? Frank,
You didn't see me sneaking it?
no, I was watching you. You
I
were-
did when I was doing one of these. I was starving.
I'm starving right now, so that's why I'm going downstairs to eat. Good night, you guys.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.